welcome to FinTalk. Today, we're talking about data, data strategy, and operations. Today's guest comes from a family of entrepreneurs, has an amazing background in corporate finance, and is a current director at Abra. Indu.
Hi.
Hey, Indu, how are you?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Good. I'm good. So happy to have you here. Thank you for making...
I'm excited to be here.
Amazing. So, I really would love to know more about yourself, where you come from, how you got to where you are. Just give me a little background about yourself.
Okay, cool. So as you mentioned, I have a background in finance. So I started my career with Deloitte, one of the big four. I started in audit, which is pretty typical for somebody pursuing their CPA, CA, which is what I was doing. Then I moved around. I served some of the biggest clients in Toronto because I was working out of the practice there. And then I moved into the advisory practice within Deloitte as well, which was really, really amazing because I got to serve clients mainly on people, process, and technology transformations. That's where I gained a lot of insights into how businesses work and what impacts, what impacts the finance department can have, as well as how much insights we can provide into the entire business.
Cool.
From then on, I got hired by one of my clients, so I moved into a Volkswagen subsidiary.
Okay.
Yeah.
You got poached, essentially.
It was a very kind poaching, where there were no bridges burned, I'd
Good.
like to think, at least.
Good.
Yeah, but it just made sense for me career-wise, and then my team at Deloitte were very understanding, so it worked out well.
Good.
Yeah, and then there I worked on a very large transformation project, mainly focused on technology across a few different business branches. So there was different countries were involved, and we were implementing a large technology to transform the way that they do finance, mainly focus on finance, but there were a few other departments involved as well. And then from there, about a year into that, COVID hit, and I started to think about moving closer to home. So home is Dubai for me because I grew up here, and I decided to take on the role at Abra. There was a really good opportunity to take on a few more departments, so I thought it made a lot of sense for my career, and it meant being closer to family. A bit too close, but here we are. Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
We're both former Deloitters.
Yeah.
So I've been thinking, do I not make the Deloitte to meet you joke? I was not going to do it, but it's done.
I'll politely laugh. So.
Good.
No, it's fine.
You've had quite an interesting journey, right? So you grew up here in Dubai, moved to Toronto, did your professional qualification, worked at Deloitte, and then made the move across and then back to Dubai. When you were in Deloitte, right, you did the auditing career or focus a couple of years. When you transitioned to the other clients, or when you got politely poached, was it a bit of a surprise, or did you kind of see that coming?
Being poached?
Yeah. Just super curious about how that
I feel
came
like
across.
everyone kind of wishes for it. So I'd had a few opportunities with clients when I was, going through. I mean, the really nice thing about being in the consulting practice is you get so much exposure, so you get to build a lot of relationships, right?
Yeah.
And then because you're at the big four, people, they know that you have some kind of standard.
Yes.
They know you have some kind of professionalism that you bring and some qualification. So it definitely made it easier for me, and the opportunities were there. The nice thing, although being poached is nice and all, and made it a bit easier for me to transition. I think the bigger part about that was that I got to learn what the company was doing before I started working for them. So
Interesting.
yeah.
So
I was already on an engagement, so I got to understand them a bit.
Got it. So the engagement that you were on, was that more focused on finance, data, operations? What was the focus?
The focus of the engagement was to take on a director of finance position at the company. So it was a part-time, interim role while they were looking for somebody. It just so turned out that when I went in, we had a few bits of transforming the procure-to-pay process, and then we moved into the full engagement, which was to implement an ERP system across the finance org as well as the procurement org.
Got it. So you said procure-to-pay process, and I immediately thought to myself, yay, procurement. I think I'm one of the few people that smiles when they hear P2P. For you, when you go through the procurement or the procure-to-pay process, one of the main things that needs to be in place is a clear methodology, right? A clear process. And as part of that, data and operations are crucial. When you transition to that finance directorship role, how did you find that their data or use of data was like, their operations? What was that experience like?
I think that data is kind of the basis upon which we should build all practices, but finance especially, because
Yes.
I think it comes a bit more naturally almost to the finance department because we're already collecting data. So it's just about then using the data to do something, to make decisions or to build on or to question our own assumptions, all of that, right? I won't speak a lot to the specific role for this specific role, but definitely at Abra I've noticed that we gather a lot of data, which is great, but then we're still learning how to fully use the data. So that's where I feel like there's always more to learn and there's more to do. So yeah.
Interesting.
Did I answer your question?
Yeah, you did. You did. Now, the first thing that comes to mind is misconceptions or the misuse of it, right? So when it comes to having a finance function that is data driven, what would you say have been the common misconceptions?
The common misconceptions about data. I think the biggest misconception that people do around data is thinking that it's useless. So I think it's really common to have. I mean, I've been at countless meetings where I have to convince people to put data into the system or to record something that they wouldn't normally be recording, and that's where my change management skill set has to come in to say that, to help them understand that there's good reason for it and this is how it's going to help us later on. I think the other challenge with data is that the first couple of weeks or sometimes months may not be that fruitful, right? You're still just trying to understand. You're just getting data in, and then only you can analyze or do anything fancy with it. So I think if you're not thinking about it in a long-term view, you probably miss the boat.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Now, you've just explained how when you go through a journey, and data transformation is a journey in itself, the first couple of months, you may not get the results you want because you're still making sure that your data is accurate, complete. Now, once you go through that journey and you actually have data that you can use, what kind of successes can you expect or hope from having that accurate data in place?
I think the biggest, so it's a loaded question because I'm going to say like what kind of successes won't you have from having the data in place, right? Because so I think it's quite common for us when we're working in a company to have all these assumptions, right? Like, oh, this is what I think the client wants, or this is what I think people need, or this is what I've been hearing about our suppliers. And the biggest opportunities exist when you have some data to be able to prove those assumptions, either to remove the biases or to help you prove your theories, or to give you some new information about it, right? So data has such a big role in making your theories come to light, and I think it also involves. Okay, actually, that's all. I don't know where I was going with that.
No. That was
Yeah.
that was so good. So that was so good. Let's drill down around that, right? Because you've just mentioned having the right data, well curated, well managed, transition from a data lake to a data warehouse, having it all categorized properly allows you to either confirm or deny biases,
Yeah.
right? When you're building a business case for whatever reason, if it's for a project or an internal solution, or even if it's a case of do we need this new ERP, having the right data is crucial.
Yeah.
Now, what kind of challenges do you think? No, actually, let me reword that. What kind of challenges have you seen around going through that data transformation journey when it comes to your finance function?
So I think there's two parts of the challenge, right? One is collecting the data, and the other is analyzing the data, right? So when we're talking about data transformation, both of those pieces are there. In terms of collecting the data, I think the challenge is beyond finance, right? Like you are often reliant on multiple business groups, departments to help you with gathering the right information in the right place, making sure it's done on time, making sure it's there, it's accurate, it's checked. It's not just garbage, because that's not really going to help you, right? And then the other part, the other big challenge is the analyzing of the data, right? So then once it's all there, is it following some kind of pattern or rhythm that helps you analyze it? I think that's the other challenge that most finance teams face.
Absolutely. Now, you've mentioned two key parts, right? One is the data gathering activities, and the second is the analyzing of this data. This actually took me back to my early graduate days, where as part of the consultation or as part of the consulting projects that we did at this time with IBM, one of the key roles that we all love to do was data gathering, right? In terms of gathering the client requirements, these type of things, right? So when you're implementing a ERP, right, or trying to map out a finance process, requirement gathering is one of the first things that you do.
Yeah, the most important thing you do. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And the amount of companies that don't even think about that, and at some point they're already implementing a solution, but they don't know what their data requirements are.
Yeah. It's a really, really good point. Not only the data requirements, any requirements, right? Like requirement gathering is like the biggest data point upon which you should be building all implementations, all tools, all technology on, right? And I feel like a lot of people skip it mainly because they don't have like the tools or the resources to do it, right? How do you do this? It's like it requires you to have both a business mind, a finance mind, as well as like a slightly technical or technology focused approach, which is hard to find. But the other part that I think that people skip requirement gathering is just because of what's in the news, what's trending. Like my friend's using this software, so I'm going to try it too. Or like my other colleague in this other place, their business seems to be doing well and they're putting this tool in place. Why don't we put that tool in? It's like really not useful for your business to work that way, because your data and your requirements are so unique. No matter how similar your business is to a competitor or to something else you've seen, you probably have your own set of pieces of story that you need to build before you go into an implementation.
Preach.
Yeah.
No, that was amazing. Really appreciate that specific point. Now, not having the right data is one thing. Not gathering it is a different thing. Now, either or, the impact is not just on the business, but also the people, the team that's actually on the ground doing the day-to-day operations. Now, when it comes to this, what kind of negative impact have you seen that it's taken on the team? Or let me reword that.
I think I got it.
You got it?
You can
there we go.
it if you want. So actually, I'll just clarify. So what you're trying to understand is what's the impact on the team of bad data or like lack of data, right?
You've put it in ways that I was not going to be able to. So yes.
Yeah. So I think if you think about it from a finance perspective, finance organizations or the finance team is usually they're a business partner, right? Their goal is to make sure that the business is served, and then they are they need to partner with all departments pretty much across the board, right? So they have a very big role in adding credibility to the business. So if you have a finance department that's working off poor data, then they are losing that credibility, and they are no longer seen as business partners. They're just seen as paper processors, which is really not the future of finance. It's really not. It's really not the point of having people there. Like we have enough tools and technology that should get us to the point where finance can actually partner with the business. So, Yeah, so I think that
You've just dropped a absolute gem,
thank
right?
you.
Now, how do you fix those issues?
I think it's an iterative process. I can't be sitting here and saying like, oh, it's all fixed. I just like,
Just the Indu magic wand,
yeah,
right?
just use my magic wand, came in. No, it's an iterative process for us. And it's been like that, I think, with any client I've worked with and now internally as well, where we, so I think what's really helped us is doing, a review every couple of months or so on what do we really need this data? Are we collecting the wrong thing? Do we still need to collect it? Maybe it was relevant a while ago and it's not so relevant now. So this has kind of helped us. So one of the things I did when I came in was, look at some of the client data points that we collect and figure out, okay, maybe we're not doing anything with this, so maybe we don't need to record this anymore, and then instead we can record this, or instead we look at a smaller data set and it makes more sense, or it can help us a bit more. So I think iteratively looking at what we are recording, what we are analyzing has really helped, and then always tying what we are doing to the goals of the business. Like finance can't have its own set of goals. It can't, if the finance team is saying, oh, I'm going to build all these reports or I'm going to do all these charts, but they have no relation to the strategy of the business or the goals of the company, then they are pretty much working in isolation, right? So constantly tying what finance is doing back to what the business needs has really helped us.
Amazing. And you couldn't have done that if you had just ignored the data and the requirements for this data as well, right?
Yeah, totally.
So I find that incredibly interesting. The reason why is because you just mapped out how the finance function would and should be able to provide different types of reports, but they need to be applicable to the end client. Yeah. This being marketing, the CEO office or whoever else it is. What do you think would happen if you didn't tailor or quarterly or monthly review the quality and the type of data that you gather?
Yeah, I mean, you just as you're telling me this, I'm getting stressed. I'm like, oh, what would happen if we didn't tailor our reports? It would just be a gigantic waste of time, right? The amount of effort. See, so we are not fully automated as a finance organization. So I'm so aware of the amount of effort that teams put into, creating reports, making sure that the teams have what they need, other teams have what they need. So if it's really not tailored to what they need, that's all just a big waste of time. The other really important part, again, is the credibility piece, right? Finance is there to be a business partner, and if they are not constantly tailoring what the business needs to improve the reporting, making sure that it's more useful, making sure that it's constantly updated, then what's finance doing?
There you go. What is finance doing, right? One of the main things that a good finance team should do is not just provide support, but really be that strategic partner, right? What would you say is the impact, right, in terms of, actually, you mentioned a little bit of this earlier. For the finance team, they need to have that reputation in terms of whatever comes from finance, it needs to be accurate, right? It needs to be able to provide that very clear North Star in terms of where we need to go to next, right? When you look at your reports, when you look at your financials, if the data isn't correct, or if you feel like you can't rely on your finance team, what do you do next? It's a bit of a loaded question.
What do you do next? So I think, it kind of goes back to my same point, where then I think in the worst case, if you're building on poor reporting for a number of periods or years, you're just making wrong decisions, right? All the time. You're like, you don't have the right set of, the compass guiding you is, not pointing in the direction that you need to go. So, So that I think can have a lot of repercussions on the business, where you put your money, where you put your effort. And I'd like to think that it's something that you should pick up pretty early, or
Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. So having the right data, having the right people, having the right tools and processes
Yeah.
do have a huge impact in terms of how your business decides to move forward and which direction it moves forward.
Yes,
right?
and I think it takes a huge stress off your leadership team to then focus on what matters. Like if I can blindly sit in a financial reporting meeting, a management meeting, saying that I know these reports are right, then my job is easy, right? I'm just then having to make decisions on what to do. If I'm sitting there questioning the data, then I have a whole different set of problems, right? Which involves a lot more time and effort. So yeah.
You're doing amazing, by the
Thank
way.
you.
Like you're sharing information that is so valuable, so insightful. It's really helpful, not just for myself, but also for anyone that's watching. It's great. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Now, on the point that we were just talking about, in terms of you sitting on a board meeting and you're getting these financial reports, insights, etc., do you have a real example, or a real life example, should I say, where, actually, I'm going to ask for two examples where one, you were sitting down, the data was correct, and you're absolutely happy with it, and it allowed you to make the right decision, and a second example where you just didn't feel like the data was telling you the full story.
I've had a lot of situations where I feel like the data isn't telling me the full story. I think the part of me that gets like triggered or gets alert when I look at data that's not fully there is if somebody in the room makes a quick jump at a decision. Every time something looks too obvious, then you're like, okay, but is it really that? So I think that kind of wakes up the part in me that wants to dig a bit deeper, or encourage my team to question a bit more on whether what they're thinking really makes sense. So I think it's easy to look at a financial report and say, okay, this year electricity costs have gone up, so let's invest in more insulation, or let's invest in new equipment, or whatever it is. But I think we have to always dig a bit deeper, right? Has there actually been some change? Do we have more people? Do we have more different systems? So I think anytime somebody in the room is making a quick judgment, I think that's what reminds me to look a little deeper, because then we can be better off knowing the full story. And sometimes we need to go beyond the finance team, right? We need to go ask the business a lot to understand a little better from the business on what's happening. So yeah, I don't know if I answered your question.
No, you did. You did. Every single time you asked if you've answered my question, you've asked it twice.
Because I was like, yeah.
No, you've gone into a level which is, I always think of things as level 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah.
And you've typically gone into level 1, immediately level 2, and then level 3, and then you go back to level 1 and say, did I answer the question, right? And that's
Okay,
great.
I'll try to stay on level.
No, you're doing amazing. I love it.
Thank you.
When you're looking at these reports and when you're questioning your team, do you think the data makes sense? What kind of data, or what's the source of this data usually? Is it a case of ERP system, multiple systems, being consolidated?
Yeah. There's usually a lot of sources. We are not currently at Abra. We are not fully automated as a finance function. We are working on it, so it's very exciting. But where we are right now is we have multiple sources of data. So there's some data that's coming from like manual input. People are writing things down. There's a lot of data coming from Excel sheets and Google Sheets, and just a lot of sheets, a really impressive infrastructure around sheets. But what that means is also there's quite a bit of manual intervention, right? And there's a bit of us having to fully figure out whether everything is connected, everything is gathered. There's sheets, and Excel is not like a ERP system where it's doing some of the checks for you. So it requires my team to be a little more analytical when they look at any data.
I really like the consistent, pragmatic approach that you have when it comes to not just finance, but the data and your strategic use of this data around the finance function. Do you have specific use cases where, maybe not just use cases, but let's say practical steps to help improve the data flow across the finance function?
Yeah, I think some practical steps. So one I talked about a bit previously is like doing a quarterly cleanse. Like how you do a juice cleanse for your body. You have to do one for your reporting too, to kind of go in and check, like, do we still need all this stuff, or is it just there because we know how to collect it, right? I think there is something is too much data. You can confuse people, and you're not really, you're just overloading your team, and they don't really then pay attention to what's required, right, when there's too much in front of them. So yeah, I think there is like one of the practical easy things to do is to do a cleanse. The other thing that I really enjoy doing with my team is if they come up with a theory or an assumption or an analysis about something, I'll just ask them to think about how they got there. Was it anecdotal? So was it like, oh, today I walked in and then somebody said this and that made me think this, and now I think we have to change all our ACs, or we have to now get all new furniture, whatever it is, or now this. So really encouraging them to go beyond that anecdotal piece of evidence that's there, because that's just the loudest thing in the room, right? And then analyze, like, okay, now that I think this, is there any way I can prove it, or is there any way that I can disprove it? Is that a word?
Disprove, yes, it is. Absolutely, it is.
Yeah, so that's something I think helps all of us to be like a little more, to be the devil's advocate for whatever we're thinking, right? Yeah, and so I think having that environment around questioning each other really helps when you have a team, right? To tell them it's okay to question me when I'm telling, when I'm making an assumption about data, and for them to do the same, to say that, hey, what you're saying isn't backed by anything, so maybe we should look into it.
How do you, as a leader, allow your team to question you?
Yeah, so I think this is a bit deeper, right? It goes into the culture question, where like what kind of culture do you need to build to take data seriously? And I think that's your real question. So I feel like it's not an easy one, right? Like people, especially in an environment like we are in a manufacturing environment where it's fairly hierarchical, traditionally. So it's made me more hyper aware about the fact that people may not question me because I'm a leader in the room and I'm bringing in all this experience and I'm here for a reason, and they already have made up their mind that okay. So then it becomes my real job to allow them to question me, right? Or to encourage it, to make it very normalized, to prove that I'm wrong sometimes myself. So I think creating that culture is not just me, but all of our leaders have to do it. And then also by practicing it, right? Where if we question each other in a room where we are a bunch of leaders talking, then it makes it more normal for the team to question us.
Absolutely. So creating a culture where data is the single version of truth, or at the center of every decision, is crucial, right?
Yeah.
Now, data is seen as gold, right? Now, when data isn't seen as gold in an organization, how do you educate your team in terms of we need to have the right data in the right places at the right time to make the right decisions? How do we go about educating our teams?
Oh, it's a tough question. I think one is making it quite clear that, we won't be making a decision because just because we feel like it. There has to be some history, some trend, some analysis, something that we can base our decision on, and that's usually data. I think it applies to everything, though, right? If you're posed with a question and you're like, okay, I need to think about it, what you're usually looking for is data. You're looking for something, some indication to tell you that, okay, this is the right way to go. And I really feel like it's an exercise of practice. So for my team too, it's been like reminding, I think now they know if they come to me with something or they go to anybody with something, there needs to be some pattern that they can prove behind it, or at least something that says that they will be collecting a pattern. So maybe we don't have a pattern now, but we are going towards that, or we are figuring out a trend. All of that is good practice. Okay, Ivan, I have a question for you. You ask me all these things about data. Do you have any examples where you feel like data or data analysis has really changed the way that something works?
Oh, I'm being asked a question. Interesting. The answer is yes, absolutely. While I was with IBM, I did two things primarily. One was finance transformation, and then the second was data strategy. Now, as part of that, I worked with many organizations looking at their use of data and essentially really helping them identify the quality of the data, the journey of the data that they gathered, and in particular, where that data funneled into and how it helped them with the decision making, right? A specific example comes to mind where it was a very large multinational insurance company, and we interviewed CEOs from the regional countries, or CEOs from different countries, CDOs, chief data officers as well. And there was a few set of questions that we always asked. Number one is, how complex is your data gathering exercises? Number two, how accurate do you feel the data is? And number three, what kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Number three being, what kind of decisions do you want to take or make from the data that you gather, right? So the first thing that they said, or they would traditionally say, is the data that I get, it's pretty good, but I still need to do a lot of work to actually refine it and make sense of it, right? So from the early 2010s to today, there's been a big change in terms of the tools that these businesses have used, right? This multinational insurance company, for example, went from using a different tool in a different process on a per country basis
To one.
Exactly, right? So standardizing how you get your data, standardizing how you transform and curate your data, and then optimizing both of these to then allow you to do a country-wide insight that then reports to a group that allows for a multinational implementation of clear initiatives and strategy based on the different types of data that you got and the insights was absolutely crucial. Now, the beautiful thing about this specific process is that although this example was about a multinational insurance company, it also applies to SMEs, right? It also applies to multicultural companies, right? Where you need to be consistent with how you gather your data, right? You need to be consistent with the level of transformation that you go through. And the decision making always should be based on data that you rely, right? So this has been one of the main things that I've seen across the data space.
Yeah, I think that's a really nice example. You came up with it quite quickly. Did you prepare?
No, I didn't. I've had some very, very strong experiences across my consulting years in particular, where I have a good 3 or 4 different projects that had a huge impact in my career, right? So, for example, one of the projects that I worked on was the implementation of a ERP system for a governmental entity. And as part of that, I was responsible for the procure to pay module and eventually became responsible for the order to cash module and support of the R2R module as well. One of the main things was data, right? So there was a work stream specifically around data, right? Now, in order to be able to do the full implementation of your ERP system, there's no point in implementing an ERP and not having any historical data there, right?
Yeah.
You need to be able to have something to back up your last year's accounts, the previous year, redo your finance architecture, all of these different things, right? Now, let's turn it back to you,
Yeah.
right? Have you seen any specific use cases where data has really impacted and helped businesses and or people?
Yeah, so I was thinking about this right before I got here, and I was thinking back to one of these articles that I read about not a business but a whole country, about Singapore, and how they use data to improve the lives of their people. So yes, it's a smaller country, but they have some strict regulations, and they have a very focused mandate on improving the quality of life of the people living there, right? So what they've done is they've used data. I think the stat was like 15, don't quote me on the stat, but 15 to 20% in reduction in commuter time by reading the data on how people are traveling through the roads. And also that results in reduction in fuel, which is one of their carbon mandates as well. So it's super interesting how, entire country can have such a big impact just by gathering like daily data, right? So
Yes.
it was also a reminder to me that every day where you're not gathering data is kind of a day lost that you could use towards history and trending and analysis. And also the other really nice example that I thought about was Amazon. So I don't know if you obviously Amazon uses heavy data gathering and data collection. And one of the things that they do with this is predict what you're going to buy. So the stat from Amazon is, I think, 30% increase in order value just by giving you the right recommendations. So when you go onto your Amazon and you see, okay, these are all the things I need, there's enough data gathered already, so it's telling you all the right things, and your purchase decision is quicker and also higher in value. So
That's predictive analytics, right? And let's talk about predictive analytics in the finance space, because that's a field that I'm very, very into, right? When we're looking at financial reports, forecasts, cash flow, we're always looking at the future. We're not looking at the past, right? Now, when it comes to the use of AI as an example, right? Predictive analytics, machine learning, etc. If we were to implement these in your business today, what would be the main things that you would love to see?
I think any analysis, any predictive analysis on client consumer behavior is really interesting for us. We work in a pretty niche industry, so our finance team is constantly making very educated guesses on our revenue modeling, but it's not an easy one to do. So I would love if there were if AI tools could help us make it a more effective prediction. There's not a lot of, especially in a country like UAE, there's not a lot of publicly available data on some of these
consumer behavior.
On consumer behavior, on even on companies and their profit and loss. It's hard to find, right? Which is like some of the main data points that I would normally use in my previous jobs to infer and make decisions or analyze, which is a bit more limited here.
It's interesting you say this. I was having a coffee with a very close friend of mine, and we're talking about insights in terms of companies, P&L, right? In certain countries, you have access to this through a public record, etc. But here you don't. How can you bypass that, right? Because you can't go and figure out, what was company A's P&L, balance sheet, etc. Is it a case of making an educated guess? Is it a case of looking into, on a neighboring country, the average P&L for a business of this size in this specific industry is X, Y, and Z? These are the assumptions that we need to take. Is that an accurate way?
Yeah, it's a real challenge. I don't think I've nailed it yet, or I'm still figuring it out. I think there's a bunch of ways, right? One is obviously seeing, what other countries and what other companies in other countries are doing. If there's publicly available information, then I think it's really useful as a start. But obviously, in the Middle East, we have specific conditions that are so contextual, right? Like I can't just take a European country or North American country and do a apple to apple comparison. So I do need a little more than that. So yeah, I think educated budget or forecast has helped us, like using various data points to get to get through our modeling. Then also just asking, asking around, like asking in your network, asking people often people are more willing to share than we realize. So I think that's also helped us, where we will try to use the data that we gather from various conversations from our network to figure out if our analysis makes sense or our predictions make sense.
Interesting. So some of the things that we've been talking about over the last, since we started this today's episodes, we've covered the impact of data in your organization if you manage your data correctly, and also if you don't, right? We've spoken about machine learning, predictive analytics, and real life examples where you've implemented some data strategies, and same for me as well. What have been the biggest learnings that you've had over the last few years in terms of how to optimize the culture around data and also the actual use of this data in your business or in your function?
My biggest learning has been, there's obviously there's a lot of learnings, but I think the one that I think about the most is how to focus my attention in the right places, and like really pay attention to what the data is telling me instead of paying attention to the loudest voice in the room, so it's been an interesting one because it's very easy, or it's very natural to get sucked into a problem that's very loud and very that's on your desk that day, and there's emails and calls, and there's a fire to fight, right? It's very natural to spring into action, but I think that it's very easy to get sucked into that routine and then think that, okay, this is the biggest problem we have to solve. So I'm trying to put this into an example. So a good example is, like, if I have a client that's not happy with the quality of something, and they're being very loud and very clear and very constantly following up, and there's a lot of attention being required to deal with it, that means that I'm likely to think that, okay, the biggest issue with us is quality, so let's spend all this time and money on trying to fix our quality. But I have to look at the data a little deeper, right? Like, what are other people saying? What are other clients saying? What have our surveys shown us? What are our snag reports like? Is there anything to support or not support what I'm thinking? So I feel like that's been the biggest learning for me, to not pay attention to just what's loud and glaring, and instead dig a little deeper, ask a few more questions, take a little more time to figure out what's the higher priority to resolve, because that ends up having the higher impact.
You've highlighted a really good example, right? Now, if you were to look back or even let's look forward, if you were to start a new project, a new engagement, where you're not sure about the quality of the information that you have or the data, what would be the first things that you would do to make sure that you hit the ground running, essentially?
I think if we were starting to do any project around data, do you mean?
Yes.
Or like around just general project?
Data.
Okay. I think the first thing we would do is, I don't know that we would start it fully. I think we might my approach would be to phase it out, to kind of tread carefully and figure out and do things as we understand them, because these projects are expensive and time consuming, and it requires quite a bit of our team's capacity. So to focus it in a place where we don't really know what's happening, I feel like we might just we may not gain the most. So if I don't have enough data to support a project or a decision that I'm going to make, I'm probably going to phase it out and do it one by one, and then see where we go from there, which also gives me some more leverage in case I decide that we should pull it or pause it or something. Yeah, I think consulting helps a lot.
It does.
Yeah.
And let's talk about that for a minute,
Yeah,
right?
sure.
Because we both had very similar experiences where we've both come from a consulting background, especially being a Big Four entity as well.
Mm-hmm.
For you, how was that in terms of helping you set up with some of the key foundations around how you approach the day-to-day work?
Yeah, I think there was good and bad from it, as you very well know. The good part of it is I feel like those bigger companies and organizations, they set you up with really good structure, right? So very well, as soon as I walked in, or very quickly, I kind of knew where to start. I had a framework for how I was going to approach a situation, analyze it, what were the things I need to look at, and how do I go about looking at it while parallelly managing the change and making sure people were involved in the right places and all of that. So that was very beautiful as approach that I had fully built into me. I didn't really need to learn that from scratch when I walked in. But I think the probably the slightly bad part of it is you're used to a lot of structure, more structure than most companies will offer you, especially if they're not in this consulting space, right? So that ends up for me initially it was a bit frustrating, right? I would bang my head against I can't find anything.
So relatable.
I don't know why are these things not written down?
Where is the process map?
Yeah, where is the guide? Where is why don't we have a flow chart? It's the first tool I bought, flow chart tool.
Yeah, do you know what? Same.
Yeah.
Same.
So,
the first thing I did into when I started working in the startup space or SME space is immediately, okay, let's map this out.
Yeah. So I think that that lame love for flowcharts really helps.
It's not lame.
Yeah.
It's not lame.
Yeah, you a kindred spirit. You found a kindred spirit.
Honestly, I my friends know me for being very systematic in certain ways, right?
Yeah.
And funny thing, on my birthday cards, they wrote a few quotes of some things that I say, and one of them said, "There's a system and a process, always." Because I say that quite often, right?
Yeah.
And that comes from that background in terms of, as a consultant, you learn to be very structured in the way that you think, right? And they really educate that very early on in your career, which really supports our careers at the later, more advanced leadership positions as well, right? When you have someone new coming into the team, is this something that you try and implement in terms of mentoring, educating them, and making sure that they follow through with that way of thinking?
Yeah, I'm going to take the question in two ways. So one thing is, I was telling you that this is all the good stuff, right? About the consulting part. You have all these processes that you can follow, and you kind of know how to pick apart a problem and solve it, and you can get deep quite quickly. The bad part, or I feel like the thing that the biggest learning for me was also not solving some things, really holding back, because I think that as coming from a consulting background, we're very used to approaching everything like it's a problem. Everything is I need to solve it, I need to make it better, I need to make it more efficient, more clean, more this, and it's not required everywhere. It's annoying and it's not required, and people don't appreciate it.
It's like a red flag.
Yeah. So I feel like that's been a big learning for me, knowing when to step back, and also knowing what some things are not broken. I don't need to fix those things. Some things are not priority. I think that's also really important. Trying to juggle a lot of balls is very confusing for our teams who are more impacted, right? So that's been a learning, stepping back from it. What was your other question? About new people coming in, yeah.
Yes.
Whether I could mentor them into. Yes, I think that one of the. I don't know if I mentor them on data, so I don't know what I would say.
That's absolutely fine. Super insightful.
Yeah.
Indu, you've given us so many different bits that are just
that you're going to chop up and put all over your LinkedIn. I can't wait.
You've given us so many different. Hold on. You've given us so many different insights, pieces of information that are super useful, super helpful, and allow leaders to understand where they're going. That's working really well, and also opportunities to improve. Do you have any final remarks or words of advice for leaders that want to improve their finance data?
Yeah, I think, if I were to kind of think about the takeaways from all that we've talked about, I don't know if there's like one final remark. I think cleanse is good to do every once in a while. Quarterly, look at what you're looking at. I think there's no such thing as too much data, but there is a thing as useless data. So you kind of have to make that decision every now and then that this is not really required, and let's help the team by not gathering it anymore. Yeah, I think. I don't know my parting words. What will my parting words be?
Build
a flowchart.
Build a flowchart.
Yeah, use a flowchart.
Use a flowchart. There we go. Make sure you use a flowchart.
Yeah.
You're working on something a little bit different as well on the side, aren't you?
Yeah. So thanks for bringing it up. We're just about to launch a new business, and I'm super excited about it. But you'll only hear more if you follow me on LinkedIn.
There we go. And what's your LinkedIn?
So it's Indu. I hope you'll tag me, Ivan.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, and you'll find me there.
Amazing. Indu, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure having you here. We've been working together for a while now in multiple engagements, and you're always a pleasure to talk to. So thank you so much for making the time.
Thanks for having me. It's my first podcast experience, and it's been really fun.
You did so good.
Thanks,
Amazing.
guys.
Thank you.